Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Living Skies Student Film Festival. Before we start, we would like to begin by acknowledging that the University of Regina is situated on Treaty 4 land with a presence in Treaty 6 territory. These are the traditional territories of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis people. We would like to recognize these lands as shared territory of many diverse peoples. And a little something on Marian before I hand the mic over to her. Born and raised in Regina, Marian Wihak is an award-winning multidisciplinary designer artist working in film, television, theater, and visual art. Selected credits include feature films Donkeyhead, Stand, a CSA 2020 nominee for Best Production Design, The Marijuana Chronicles, Tammy Always Dying, Love Jacked, Secret Disco Revolution, Julie Walking Home, and television projects Dreaming of a Jewish Christmas, Good Witch, Wildcard, Melgard, Pit Pony, September Songs, Cold Squad, and Road to Avonlea. As a visual artist with her MFA, Marian's work encompasses drawing, painting, and installations. She has been supported by the Canada Council and Ontario Arts Council, and her work is in private and corporate collections across North America. I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. And thank you, Sam. And also thank you, Kalik, and everyone at the Living Skies Film Festival for inviting me and helping me get this thing organized technically. It's a pleasure to be here. I think Sam mentioned that I was born and raised in Regina, and I actually had my original theater training at the University of Regina, which I don't know how many of the people watching this tonight are from Regina or actually going to the University of Regina. But anyway, that's where I started. And the theater department and art department, where I did my major and minor, were in fact in what is now the studio building, the Creative Saskatchewan, I think it's called, the studio building on College at Broad. And so I actually have a long history with that building, having just worked in there when I was on Donkeyhead, and also having spent 4 years in there doing my BFA. Anyway, I have a long history and family in Regina, and anyways, I'm really glad to be part of this and very honored to be invited. I want to give you just a little background on Stand, which is going to be the focus of this evening's conversation. I'm going to sort of walk you through how I production designed it and the various steps and guidelines I used typically and generally when I production design, but also specifically focused on Stand. And as time allows, I'll also talk a little bit about the work I did on Donkeyhead recently. So I just want to give you a little background on Stand. And I'll often refer to it as Strike because that was the original title when I was first brought onto the project. And it was a really terrific project. And I'll just put that right out there. It was a really fantastic project to work on. But in April 2018, when I was first called about working on it, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know that, Danny Shore, the producer that called me to ask me to do it. But as it turned out, the director of it was Rob Adetuyi, who I didn't know, but I had met him in a hotel lobby in Cape Town when I'd been working on a film that his brother, Alphonse Adetuyi, had been directing. So that's often how it happens, is you get a job through a connection like that. It's rarely just out of the blue. It's almost always through someone you know or someone you've worked with in the past, and and it's worked out well, so they give your name to someone else. So anyway, that was the background on this as well. Anyway, so Danny called me April 2018, and I think it was on a Thursday, and he said, "Can you come out to Winnipeg, or would you be interested in coming out to Winnipeg to design this feature based on my stage musical called Strike?" And the story he told me was rooted in the 1919 Winnipeg General Strike, and it was going to be a musical. And I thought, well, this sounds like it could be fun and it's feature, and so I said yes, I would do it. Though before I could commit to it, I had to quickly wrap up some work I was doing on a documentary drama with a colleague I worked with many times. And anyway, I found someone to replace me, and by Monday I was out in Winnipeg, ready to start work. Now, typically I have a little more time, not always a lot of more time, but typically I have a little more time to, in fact, read the script deeply, do a little research, that kind of thing. But I didn't really have much more time than just to pack and do a cursory investigation into 1919 and the Winnipeg strike, and to look at some pictures of locations that Danny had already put together for me. So I'm bringing this up because I'll drill down into how I designed the strike, but I also want to also keep in mind I'm giving you a bit of a template of how I typically design. And this is just the background on this one, which was not quite a typical start. So I had very little time to prepare for this, very little time to do more than just a cursory read of the script. And on Monday, I flew out, and within an hour, I was in a van doing location surveys with the director, the DP, and Danny, the producer. And we hightailed it all over town and walked the streets and everything. And because at that time we were going to be going to camera in a month's time, there really wasn't much time to spare. So we put it as our goal to, between Monday and Wednesday, we would shortlist what our main locations were going to be. And we immediately clicked creatively. It was fantastic. This is one of the early stages of working on any film, is you spend a lot of time in a van looking at locations, because there's always locations, almost always, even if it's studio builds. And we clicked creatively, and we talked about how we wanted to approach the film. And in this early stage, it was going to be a musical with song and dance, a slightly heightened theatrical approach, approximating what Baz Luhrmann did in Moulin Rouge, but of course we didn't have nearly that much money. But that was the goal, that was the idea, that it would have a certain mix of contemporary and period qualities. The film was originally budgeted back in April 2018 for $12 million, which is a nice size for a Canadian film. But again, it was going to be period, and there was going to be song, dance, and all that stuff. So that money would go fast. Anyway, so we had a really good first 3 days. And then on Thursday morning, we were called to a production meeting, and we're told that, in fact, a huge chunk of financing had disappeared and that we were just supposed to go home. There was the hope that the film would get back on its feet, but we didn't know when that would happen. So, that was really sad, because we'd really been clicking as a group. So we went out for a big meal and drank lots of wine in the lobby of the hotel that night, and just hoped that we'd get to return and pick up where we left off at some point in the future. So for the next 3 months, I worked on a movie of the week as an interim sort of thing, and I kept in touch with Rob, the director. And fortunately, middle of July 13th or 16th or something, I was back in Winnipeg, and we were picking up where we left off. Now, I had known about a week or two before that I would be coming out to Winnipeg, and we would start working on Stand again. So I was able to actually do a proper reading, do more research, and this is where I want to kind of engage you in what the process that I typically work on, because I was able to actually somewhat approximate a more ideal process of prepping a movie. So I'm just trying to think, is there anything else I want to give you as a prelude to that? Yeah, no, I just want to actually, if Kelly, if you could put up the script, because I want to just take you through the guidelines of what I would normally use for my approach to production design. And so this is these aren't rules, and sometimes they change and stuff, but these are just kind of basic guidelines that I use when I production design. So the script is the starting point, full stop, it's the starting point. Clearly there's scripts that are more improvised or ad-libbed and stuff like that, but whether it's an outline or whatever, but whatever the producer, director, screenwriters give you, that is what I as a designer would work on. I think, again, there's all sorts of models out there now, but this is typically what I would be working with. So the script is my starting point. And then research is the next thing I do. And I do it concurrent with second and third reads of the script, typically. I'll show you the research in a minute, but I'm just taking you through the basic stages here. So research is really important, because if it's a period film or something like that, then of course you really need to use the research, the archival research and the period research to get a sense of the time frame that you're going to be working in. But I also, just as importantly, pull up a lot of very just evocative images or abstracted images. And again, I'll show you some examples of this very shortly. We also have to decide whether we're shooting on location or in a studio, or sometimes that's already decided just because of the budget of the show. And going back to, when I was first getting involved in Stand, I was told that this would be the model, is that we would shoot on location with some retrofits and some minor studio builds and stuff like that, but it wouldn't be a backlot show, and it wouldn't be a fully studio set built. Anyway, but there's decisions that impact that. And again, I'll walk you through that very shortly. Collaboration, it's super important because, film is a collaborative art, and it enhances and it drives all of your decisions and the outcomes of the project as well. And there's various kinds of collaborations. Of course, there's, between the producer, screenwriter, director, designer, DP, costume designer, what we call the key creatives. And then, of course, there's on a location show, and almost every show has some aspect of location. I'm working very closely with the location department right off the bat. Like it's a very crucial relationship, and we can't do a good job designing the show if we don't have good locations to work with. So that's a very important relationship as well. And then also there's the art department itself. There's myself, my art director, my set decorator, my props person, the graphics people, the construction people, the paint people. There's a lot of people involved in this collaboration, and it constantly percolates and you feed off each other. So it's a very satisfying part of the job. And to achieve the most successful outcomes in this is pay attention to those first 4 points I gave. Preparation and organization is huge. I'll talk about that more a little later as well. But yes, it's an art. A lot of it's about creating beautiful pictures, choosing nice things to go in those frames. But it's hugely organizational, involving budget, schedules, all that kind of thing. So it's surprising how much of your time gets spent doing that. And attention to detail. Oops, I've jumped a point there. Positivity. You need to be both flexible and tenacious at the same time, in sort of an equal measure. Things change, but beyond our control. Things change sometimes, and you're the only one that has to still sort of like push things up the hill, and everyone else sort of seems to be just falling in nicely behind. But whatever. Flexibility and tenacity, and like making sure you get the job well done. Sometimes it's holding on to your vision, but this is a balance that one really has to learn. And I'm still learning it, and I've been doing this a long time. Attention to detail, while always keeping your eye on the big picture. So don't go down the wormhole if everything's falling down around you. So anyway, these are just some guidelines I use. Again, they aren't rules, and they come into greater and lesser focus as you work through a project. So just keep these in mind as I show you the pictures and images that I gathered while making Stand. So to get things sort of started, give a framework, I imagine not many of you seen the movie. It did get released in Canada, and it played in Regina, I think for maybe 2 weeks or something like that. And it is streaming, I believe. But anyway, here is a clip from Stand. It's the trailer. And just to give you a context of everything that I will show you afterwards. Okay, take it away, Kalik.
Prices have doubled, but your wages have not. Your working conditions are terrible. So,
I'm tired of all the people.
What if you could earn $90 in 6 months?
Who tell me I should just go sit down.
You think the government will let an immigrant tell them what to do?
I'm sick of being seen as feeble.
I'm Stefan Sokolowski.
And being scared in my hometown.
Do you live here?
I live there. My name is Rebecca Almazo.
When you don't count me among your equals.
You got this color skin, and they don't let you in no more.
Just lie down.
The more we do nothing, the more nothing changes.
So now I'm gonna stand on the strength of those shoulders.
join us in a general strike.
Stand up and never back down.
Who's in?
These hands have the strength to move boulders.
Put down your tools!
I've drawn my line in the sand.
Everybody out!
And this is where I stand. Not gonna swerve.
It isn't illegal to speak one's mind in this country.
Till I land.
Then make it illegal.
The
revolution under our noses.
Forget about that Jewish girl and this strike.
Foreign scum! People have a lawful rights!
Get the damn thing stopped before it gets off the ground.
And this is where I stand.
Clear those troublemaking foreigners out of the unions and right out of the country.
Drawn my line in the sand.
If you go, Stefan Sokolowski, I'll go with you.
Is where I stand.
Everything's changed. The world's upside down. But we can't stop.
So, again, that was a clip of Stand. And something I should have mentioned before, but I'll mention now, is when we came back in the August to actually start working on this, the budget was no longer 12 million. It had been reduced to 7 million. So this impacted like what could be accomplished, obviously. And one of the very smart and chill decisions that Rob made, he was a really, like, he could just pivot and sort of just make things work for him without stressing on the fact that it isn't what he'd originally planned. Anyway, he just decided to get rid of the choreography. It would only be a narrative with singing, because the choreography and the reason for for dancers and all that, it just added so much extra expense. So he just reimagined it as a narrative musical, sort of along the line of Les Mis. And at the same time, he expanded the social political palette of the film by building in Indigenous characters, African Canadians, and also the women's suffragette movement. So it got better, as often is the case. You get confronted with a challenge and just find ways to adapt and make things better, which I think is here. So anyway, we only had 5 weeks approximately to start prepping once I found out that this was back on its feet. And a lot of that time was spent trying to find crew, to be honest. So concurrent with trying to find crew, because Winnipeg's very busy, that's a tax credit, and a lot of people were busy. I was doing this research and getting familiar with the script. So again, going to the fact that the script is the starting point. What I do then, I distill the main thrust of the story, pull out the themes and the primary world that we're going to be creating. And this is what my reading of the script, once I had time to really do it, informed me. Okay, the times were 1919, all this story talked about. The world is there's a mass migration of people fleeing Europe following World War I and going to different parts of the world, including Canada. There's a huge shift in socioeconomic realities. It's a confusing and intense time. And auspiciously, it would sow the seeds for the 20th century labor unions and improved working conditions eventually, not right off the bat. So the worlds are, we've got people fleeing and the war in Europe and different challenges. And our main characters, Mike Sokolowski and his son Stefan, have come to Winnipeg to try to carve out a new life for themselves and to make enough money to bring the rest of the family from the Ukraine over. They move into a tenement complex, which is where our main characters really live. That's their domestic environment. And when he moves in, he becomes smitten with his Jewish Ukrainian next door neighbor, Rebecca. And she's very involved in the women's suffrage movement, but she's also very involved in the labor movement with her brother, Moishe. So anyway, that's and also because she's Jewish, it's a conflict with her Stefan's dad, Mike, who's Catholic, and so there's a little bit of that part of the conflict as well, which was very real at the time. So we've also got the soldiers returning. They're all pissed off because the new immigrants are taking all their jobs, and there's also the antagonist is a fictitious character, and A.J. Anderson, and he's a wealthy lawyer. And he gathers his forces and cronies together to try to combat this rising labor movement. So that's kind of the background of the story. And the worlds are basically the laborers and the workers, and Mike and Stefan, rooted in Mike, Stefan, and Rebecca's world. And then there's AJ's world of power and wealth. So the first thing I started doing that is visual was research. And if you don't just pull up the general archive of research for me, Killick. Thank you. So this is just a quick collage, and I'll take you through the individual pictures. But this is just a sampling of their archival research I might do. And because this story was rooted in a very specific time in history and a specific event, the Winnipeg general strike, I needed to really get some imagery of what that world was like. And so these are various images, these are the two images of the war that had just finished. So some of the characters, they've come back from the war. And then there's also, let's just go through these just slightly more quickly. And that, okay, just hold on this for a sec. Okay, we didn't use this in the end, but a lot of people are coming back disfigured from the war. And this isn't a well-known fact, and you never see it in movies because it's pretty horrific. But there's lots of research about this. And anyway, it was just too much. Rob felt it was just too far to go, so we didn't have any characters or anything like that. This is a picture, a very tiny picture, sadly, of there's labor movements in Spain as well. So this is an example that this push internationally for better working conditions, better pay, was not just in Winnipeg, it was not just in Canada, it was worldwide. There's immigrants coming from, again, all over the world. This is an arrival of a certain group of immigrants. There's more immigrants, I think, in the next picture. And again, they're coming from all over Europe. And, no money, no homes, anything like that. So in many ways, this is resonant. Oh, and there was also pushback against the aliens, they called them. No, not the same language, not the same culture. So does it remind you of anything? So these are just background pictures that I collected so that I could get a sense of what the world in general was. The suffrage movement, women's marches, and also it was a time of shift. There was still horse and buggies, but there was also cars. So it was the Industrial Revolution was now having time to implement itself within people's day-to-day lives. So this was also a texture. And delivery wagons, Eaton's delivery wagon was by horse. Milk was delivered by horse. So even though there were cars, this picture here, this became a model kind of for our tenements. So you'll see this kind of image further down the line, but this was the picture that Rob said, yes, that feels right. Okay, so just kind of stick that in the back of your mind. Whoops, and that's just another place, laundry, strung out, close quarters, people living in close quarters. The next picture, I think, people, still carrying their clear qualities of their, the countries and worlds and cultures that they came from. It's just another example of some internal research. So all of these pictures that I gathered, and these are just a sampling, they all go up on the wall all around the art department so that everybody becomes very familiar with the worlds we are creating. So whether it's the production assistant in the front office, or whether it's the costume designer, or whether it's the set decorators, as people come onto the show, I just want them to become immersed in the world that we're creating. And it's very useful. And I've done it for years. And again, these are just more pictures of the same to give you a sense of these, the textures that we're creating. And sometimes we draw specific details from them, but they're not meant as that. They're more just meant as an immersive experience. I don't know what that little zing was. That was my computer or what, but yeah, if you just finish going through these, Caleb. Yeah, so you get the idea. Oops, that's really dinky. Okay. Okay. Oh, there's also our characters get locked up in the local jail, so that's why these are there. And there's also arriving by train. That's why the images of the train are there. What's that? It's really small. The printing press. Sorry, I just quickly gathered some of these, and some of them are much smaller than others. And then the last one I think is also a printing press. Okay, so concurrent with this kind of archival research, I'm also doing research that is more based on mood, inspiration, abstraction, things like that. Oops, sorry, no, I'm going to go back a bit. These are images of the actual Winnipeg General Strike, actual images. So you can see there's a lot of people on the street. There was actually 30,000 people marching, which is apparently at the time was the largest general strike in North America. Our budget in no way allowed for that many people, which I'll talk about a bit about later. But just so you get a sense of just how many people hit the street to sort of fight for better wages and better representation within their societies. This image of the tipped over streetcar is very famous. We didn't do that. Our story focused more on the characters that were working within this, the Mike, the Stefan, the Rebecca, their lives. So we avoided some of these more iconic images of the Winnipeg strike just because we couldn't afford to do it. This is, I think this is a really dinky picture, but I think it's of the horses that were put up by a character like AJ. AJ is not a real person, but there were people like him who put horses onto their horses onto the strike, the people in the streets. And also there was a whole kind of group of people called the brown shirts. So maybe that was kind of just a colloquial term for them. You know, brown shirts refers to those people, but you can see they have batons in their hands. So they did beat and chase down the people on the street at a certain point. So there was some violence involved, and actually one person died in the real strike, and his name happened to be Mike. Well, didn't have his name was Mike Sokolowski. Our character is Mike Sokolowski, but there's not enough known about the real person to have done a biography about him. So that isn't the intent. It was more just as an example. Okay, so concurrent with these kind of archival images and historic images and research, finding images that kind of capture the mood and the tone are just as important. And let's see, yeah, okay. So that, yeah, these are, let's go to one by, this is, yeah, if you want to just do the one by one picture for me, please, Caleb, that'd be great. So this image here, I'll just hold on this for a second. I use this image quite often, to be honest, and it's because it clearly shows that there's two things going on. One's warm and one's cool. I mean, it sounds kind of basic, but it's been very useful just to kind of get that conversation going. And it's not about the Art Nouveau details in this. The time period might be right, but that wasn't the point. It was more just about warm and cool, and that as a reminder that yes, there's two worlds going on in our story, two dominant worlds going on in our story. Okay, the next one. Oop, that's really dinky. Okay, let's just keep going on. Wow, some of these are so small. Sorry about that. Some of these are pictures that Roy, the DOP, shared with me, and I didn't check the size. Sorry. Anyway, so we can just look at these, and again, they're abstracted, they're amorphous, they're just more inspirational things with the shadows and light, abstracted images. Now, Roy Wagner was our DP, and he wasn't physically in Winnipeg until about 3 weeks before we started shooting, but we were certainly talking a lot prior, sharing these images, and we got very much on the same page in that way. Now I'll just mention that Roy was not the first DOP that was involved in the project. He came on just at this point, but he and Rob had worked together before. So in the shift between April and July, Rory came on as a new DOP. Now the reason I have these pictures of what look like song and dance musicals is partially because, again, originally this was going to be a song and dance musical. And so I even referred to old movies, Hollywood movies that might have captured the right kind of stylized abstraction that we were going to be after, the heightened theatricality I mentioned in terms of Baz Luhrmann's Moulin Rouge. This is West Side Story. This is From My Brilliant Career. Two stories that have to focus on a couple, obviously, and which again, at the core of our story, one of the more compelling parts is the story between Rebecca and Stefan. Some of these really dark, shadowy images are ones that Roy sent me, but again, they were fantastic, and we definitely got on the same page about them. And in the course of Rob's and his and my conversation, and I can't remember how we did it. It was pre-Zoom, which is hard to believe, but yeah, we didn't have Zoom then. But we collectively decided to embrace the concept of abstractions as our guide. And the sort of subtext of that is, when one's living the moment, you aren't fully aware of the import it's going to have until hindsight and history kind of register the fact. So to achieve this sense of dislocation, we decided to use layers of shadow, light, texture, and reflections to land a visual ambiguity. So this is really key to, how we're building the look of the movie. Another aspect of the story that was very important to pay attention to was the fact that it was the world of the haves and the have-nots. I mentioned that already. There, there's the laborers, the workers, the immigrants, and then there's AK and his cronies, the lawyers, the business people that didn't want anything to advance. So these are just examples of those two worlds and the contrast between them. Of course, the grand mansions of the wealthy. That isn't the mansion we used in the end, but we did look at it as a possibility. And this is just various interiors. We decided rather than I thought it was best to go after a somewhat contemporary interior for the times, 1919. AK was a man in his early 40s, I think, and his wife was, almost a suffragette. If she wasn't married to such a wealthy guy, she would have been right off. But they dressed in contemporary fashions for the time, and they didn't have heavy Victorian insides. This one's a bit heavy and Victorian, but generally they also embraced more like arts and crafts, Rainy Macintosh, lighter qualities like that. And the house we ended up using did have something like that. I believe there's a picture later on for that. So again, something lighter, again, for the times, more modern and contemporary feeling. And this is unfortunately a smaller picture too, but anyway, hopefully get the idea. So these are pictures of the have-nots, the people who worked in factories, and the, let's see what else, what's the next picture? People who worked in factories, and yeah, it's another factory, very small picture. And a welder. This actually, we actually had a character dressed like this welder, and sorry, it's such a small picture, but we had a character like that. And welding in the pump hose. Now this picture, actually, we actually tried to emulate that within our film. I don't think I have an exact picture of that, but we did try to emulate that and use that as a model, that structure. And what else do we have here? Oh, okay, so this is a telegraph thing. Okay, just right, this is an aside. So this is an image, and I hope you can see it. I'm sorry, it's so small. It's a bunch of women at a telephone exchange. If you just hold that for a bit, that's when I finish the story about this, is originally in the script and originally in the Winnipeg strike, some of the first people out, refusing to work were female telephone operators. So they shut down the telephone systems and communications in the city. We couldn't really afford to build that, and nor were the parts for that kind of prop readily available. However, and we can go into the next picture, the sewing ladies, is interestingly enough, the Salvation Army Village, all the secondhand stores, thrift stores in Winnipeg seem to all have a lot of sewing machines. So we just shifted that, and you can go into the next picture, Kayla. And we had the women working as sewing people. And this is actually an image from a film I did like 20 years ago, but it was more just an idea that we'd have quite stylized row of women sewing, and I think you saw that in the clip with just overhead lights. So and again, this is just some research I did for what did sewing rooms look like back then. So that was and then this is back to the tenement area. So anyways, part of this is just to explain that, okay, you have to sometimes, okay, we can't afford to do this, but what can we afford to do better? And that's where the shift to sewing happened. Again, these are just repeat pictures of people living in tenement situations that we, again, did start to look at in a more literal way as we got closer to addressing the sets. Okay, so we could, that's that. So let's just look at the palette conversation now. We've got palette, thank you. So there's that picture again, and because this picture with the gold on one side, the gold light on one side and the blue on the other, became quite integral to our conversation about palette. And it was also thematic. And my palette also was dictated by the locations. So when Roy saw this picture, he really loved it, and so did Rob, that first picture. And we decided to really demarcate visually the world between the haves and have-nots, which of course makes sense, but we'd also do it through palette and lighting. So Roy's plan was to devise the world so the immigrants and laborers basically lived in dim shadow, cool colors, drained of any warmth and comfort. While the home and office of the wealthy antagonist and his cronies would be bathed in the golden Globe privilege. So I think you can see these are pictures actually from, except for the very first picture, these are all images from the film itself. And I think we quite successfully made that demarcation between the Golden Globe privilege and the world dreamed of warmth and comfort. And even though, you know, one might question, well, why give the bad guys the nice environment? Well, that was just the reality. And we didn't want to pretend that just because our protagonists were the most important and most compelling characters, we didn't want to pretend that they were living actually in a cozy, wonderful world. So anyway, it's kind of a basic idea, but it prevailed. And it also lent us the kind of the agency to embrace a stylized approach that was yet still believable. Now, one of the things that, because of the budget was not huge, 7 million sounds not too bad, but in fact, it didn't allow me to just paint the sets whatever colors I wanted. I really had to build on what locations themselves could offer. So I in many cases, I used the greens and grays that already existed in many of the locations, and you'll see that shortly when I show you images of our locations, what we did to them. And similarly, the working class labor type environments often had this kind of dark green and industrial gray paint all over them. So I just built on that. And similarly, the wealthier world of AK, we used the legislature, the Manitoba legislature, which is a beautiful building made of limestone, and it's very warm and grand and gorgeous. And the mansion that we chose to use for AK, which was on Wellington Crescent, had beautiful wood paneling in it, and it just had a real golden quality about it. So this also contributed, obviously, is by choosing locations that helped us make our visual statements. Now, what I do, this is just a sideway on how I actually chart the colors, is I have this handy NIX thing. I don't know if you can see it. You can see it there. Okay, so it's this little thing that has a little lens on it, you see, and it's got an app that's on my phone, and I could go around and just press this to a wall at a location and press the picture button on my phone, and it would register the color. And in the app, you load up what color catalogs you want to use, whether it's Benjamin Moore or Gibbons, whatever color you want to use, and it'll tell you, oh, this is this color. So that was one way I quickly registered the colors. But I also used a flip book, these kind of color flip books. These are both tools that I use all the time. You've probably seen these in paint stores and stuff, but anyway, they're super handy and they're completely integral parts of my toolkit. So that's how I kind of recorded the colors as we go around and choose our locations. And then Brittany in the art department went to all the paint stores, and she got color chips to match the colors that we had to work with at the locations, and also chips of colors that I was going to add or augment those existing colors with. And she made big color boards, and they, like all the research pictures, went up in the art department, actually not in the art department, in the production office, so that anyone, the costume designer, the set decoration people, and props department, everyone could look at them and get a real, again, an increasingly granular sense of what our world was going to be. We also put up location pictures, which I'll get into very shortly. So one of the, again, one of my guidelines is, do we decide to just shoot on location or studio? And again, this film was always going to be a bit of both. And because I'm a visual artist as well, as Sam mentioned, and probably for the last 10 years, rather than painting, I've primarily been doing installations. So I like to think of production design almost as creating large site-specific art installations. And I do it with a team of amazing collaborators, and it's of course driven by the script with the director's vision, but it's still, for me, it's a very hands-on haptic engagement. Yes, there's a lot of organization, a lot of it's in your head, but it's also, it becomes a very visceral experience as well. So forming a team that embraces that approach is really important to me. And fortunately, I was able to find some really excellent, talented people in Winnipeg. Despite how busy it was, I finally found some people that were available and many of them just entering the film business, but they were fantastic. And I also had to bring a few colleagues in from Toronto just because there was enough people available in Winnipeg. But we had a great team, and we all worked really well together. So something I just want to mention too is when I start showing you images of our locations, is when I am working on a project, and even if we know we're maybe going to build sets, maybe there's enough money to build sets, or maybe we're doing it in studio, those first weeks of prep help you decide that if it isn't already mandated, by the producers or the production beforehand. So when you go through and look at these locations, even if it looks kind of, well, there's nothing here, and I've certainly been on many surveys where the director walks in and out and doesn't want to spend any time looking at it, I'll always look at it so that at least I can assess what's the potential here. And I think that's really important, because I tell you, more than a few times, it's been the case is I'll pull the director back into a space that to them doesn't really offer anything, but say, well, what if we do this? So to me, it's really important to always look at what the potential in a space has, and let that drive you or inform your decision. So anyway, we did this a lot, even though we knew that we didn't have money to build the whole show in the studio anyway. It really helped to just take that time to say, okay, what can this space provide for us? And I'll often do quick thumbnails sketches. I've got one in the next section of images I'll show you, and it just helps. It's a verbal language. It's a visual language, right? And it's just a way to quickly convey what you think you could do to a particular space. And it's an ongoing discussion, of course, like how you're going to work between location and builds and things like that. And but it's always important to kind of keep the I can do this, or this is a can do thing, rather than saying no way, there's no way we can do this. There's not a position you want to go to. So let's move on to some images of a location and our set builds as we turn them into the worlds for a stand. So this is let's hold on this picture for just a bit. This is the alley that was our immigrants tenement alley, and we had spotted this back in April, and we went back to it in July, and it just offered so much. I mean, you can see the fire escapes it has going up the side. It is in a street, so the alley kind of helps enclose it more. On top of the gold brick wall there, you can see one of my set designer standing on it with his tape measure, because we built a wall. Our plan was to build another wall on top of that to help kind of enclose the space even more. And the big double doors, we needed an entrance and exit into the tenement building. So that is, you can see it in the first picture. It's just a loading dock entrance, but you'll see in the next pictures, we built stairs outside, we made it into a doorway, and there were entrances and exits as part of the story. So anyway, this was what it looked like beforehand. And then if we go into the next group of pictures, you can just go one by one through those too. So yeah. And then there's the scribble sketch, that first image. You can just go to that individually if you want, Kayla. Yeah, so that's a scribble sketch I did just to kind of give the feeling of, okay, with this location, this is what we can make it feel like. And so that was it. But now, one thing I will point out, so we're starting to work away on this. Let's go to the next picture. And this is my team starting to put everything in place. And just to show you just how great these people are. Okay, so in the lower left picture, the woman in the black t-shirt, that was Brittany. She was the art department PA. And the woman beside her in the white t-shirt was my graphic designer. But we just kind of needed all hands on deck. And so, like, even though it was a union show, people didn't sort of, say, I can't do that. That's not my job spec. We all just got in there and built this thing. And it was really great. And then you can see we had to dye in mud, all sorts of sheeting and stuff to hang. And then the picture on the lower right is a picture you'll see later. It's the interior tenement apartment. But let's go on to the next picture. now what, this is it finished. Now, one thing that came up literally just 2 weeks before we were going to shoot in here, and Rob had planned to stage all these shots and sequences on the fire escapes. Who wouldn't? It's such a fabulous part of the location. But just 2 weeks before we went to camera, we found out that in fact the fire escapes weren't safe. Not only to just not walk on us as crew people, but no way you could you put a camera and or cast on there. So I was like, oh geez, it just like took away a whole element of this fabulous location. But again, Rob was really chill about it. He just accepted it and he just restaged things elsewhere. And we still got to see them as kind of a decorative aspect of the this picture here. Is the front doors that we built in that archway that I showed you, and the stairs in front. A few songs happened there, and the laundry was all partially to emulate the archival pictures that research we'd found. And also it helped mask off a few kind of more contemporary taller buildings that were in the distance, and just gave texture to the space. So now we had designed all this, like the laundry, you can see the outhouse in the back, and there was various little wood lean-tos and things like that, and all that dressing. We had designed it to go up and come down and go back up again fairly quickly, because we knew that there was going to be at least 1 or 2 occasions where that would be necessary. As it turned out, this alleyway that we had chosen was in fact a pretty busy delivery access for trucks dropping off goods and supplies to the businesses that backed onto this alleyway. And anyway, for various reasons, we actually had to put that alleyway, that whole look of the immigrant tenement alleyway, we had to put it up and down at least 4 times. So that was rigorous, but anyway, it was still worth being there at that location. This is an image of the interior Sokolowski and Almazov apartments, or at least this is what it looked like before we built them. The first picture is this empty space. Just want to, so just hold on this for a second. So this is what I think it was the 4th floor of that tenement building looked like. And fortunately it was empty, so it allowed us to build a set in there. It had windows overlooking the fire escapes, which at the time when we decided to use it were fire escapes we thought we'd get to use. Anyway, so this is what we had. And then this is drawings that geez, I'm just blanking on his first name, Buchek, my set designer did for us in SketchUp. So you see one of the kind of elevation is basically the hallway we built, and then the other 2 are more plans or an axiometric of both the hallway and the apartment. And this apartment, again, was built up against the windows, and it had a doorway off the long hallway that we built. And it was going to be used both as the Sokolowski apartment, and then changed slightly in terms of dressing, and a few walls would be changed to become the Almazov apartment. So it served 2 purposes, which is often what you have to do regardless of the budget of the show, is reinvent things. So this is the hallway set that we built within that big open space. And the opening scene, I think you saw in the clip, had them walking down it. And then this is the Almazov apartment, looking back towards the entrance of it. And then the next picture is the Rebecca's area of the apartment. So I'll switch to that picture. Yeah. Okay, so you get a sense of it. And there's an example of the kind of that abstracted veiling that I'd shown you in those images. Roy really wanted to use it a lot. I mean, part of me, the logic, and he goes, she'd never have such a flimsy curtain in front of her bed if she's trying to be, have some privacy between her and her brother. But anyway, you sort of, I embraced and trusted Roy's instincts that this would be a very shootable thing, and it was used to great effect during the course of the filming. Okay, I think we're on to streets. Yeah. So okay, back to the streets that I talked about in terms of the Winnipeg strike scenes. So let's just go to the first image of this, please. So just hold on this for a second. So I think I mentioned that Winnipeg has a lot of fabulous extant architecture from the time. And so this was fabulous. This was a great thing for us to use. Just hold on these pictures for a second, Caleb. But it was also important to choose streets that didn't have a huge scope. So I chose narrow canyons for us to look at, so that we could, with a limited number of extras, we could make it look like they were full. So these were streets that we chose for that. And I think there's one more picture that, oh yeah, there's one more. The next picture, please. Yeah, so just hold on this for a sec. So this was a really great street because it was very narrow. It went on for 2 or 3 blocks. And this is Rob, our director, acting out the Mike character getting shot. So that's what we often do on these location surveys. We act out what has to happen. And in the background, in the green jacket, that's Alan Gollyboff, our first assistant director. He's pretending to be a guy on a horse. So anyways, we're kind of acting out the scenarios as we're choosing our locations. But this location here, like where you see those windows there on the left, that actually became a doorway because there was this, we wanted to build a platform, and you'll see it in the next picture where you see the crowd walking. You can kind of just see it a little bit on the left there. Anyway, so just hold on this picture for a sec, because this is how this kind of narrow canyon of the street really worked to our advantage, because again, we only had 100 extras, but Danny, the producer, and he's kind of a local hero of sorts, went on the radio, on TV, and he went, put ads in the paper, asking people of Winnipeg to come out and bring their own costumes and be an extra in the march scenes. And like I have to say, like myself and the director, we kind of rolled our eyes and thought, are you kidding? Nobody's going to do this. 300 people showed up in their own version of 1919 laborers' costumes. And, for basically a free lunch, they marched back and forth, up and down for 8 hours. And it was fantastic. And I mean, yes, they had their own costumes. Some of them, there was a few Hello Dollies in there that we had to kind of put at the back because they were just too fancy for what the story we were trying to tell. But it was impressive how many people came out. And they're at the back end of this. They had the hired extras and a few actors in the front rows of these marches. But that is how we got it. And it really, I think it pulled it off. And this is another scene where the location really helped serve us, because the legislature in Winnipeg is beautiful. It's almost identical in the overall way to or general way to the Regina, Saskatchewan legislature, but the Winnipeg building has been so well maintained and retrofitted. If it's been retrofitted, it's been retrofitted period accurate. It's just beautiful. And also they're super film friendly. Like they just bent over backwards, letting us use that space. And so this was used to great effect in the film. There's a scene where all the protesters are down at the bottom, and one of the main labor organizers singing a song goes up the stairs. This is the pump house where Stefan and Mike worked. And let's look at the first picture of this. We had seen this location back in April, and it was so fantastic. It's like, well, of course, when we come back in July, we'll have to use it. And back in April, when we first looked at it, we were thinking we were going to have to stage dance performances there too. So it seemed a little tricky, and it was like, oh, how are we going to do that? We'll have to put some platforms down, etc. But when we came back in July, the dancing was gone. So we just embraced it as a fabulous location. This is a picture of, just hold on this for a sec. This is Chris, one of the set decorators, measuring this existing wheel, because we were making our own version of a wheel that the actor could then animate. I don't have a clip of that or a photograph of that, but we wanted to create some elements in this warehouse that didn't have any moving parts. We wanted to be able to animate some of it so the actors had something to engage with. So in front, right where he's measuring, we put a big cog, we built a big cog, and the actor was able to turn it as if he was running some pulley or something. The next picture, please. And this is a picture of it once it's dressed. And that conveyor belt band that's floating across on the top there, it never moved. We didn't have it moving within our story. Again, couldn't afford that. But what we did do is those tables that the men are all standing around are basically conveyor belts, just hand propelled conveyor belts, but allowed bins to go by. So it looked like they were doing something. And there was also, we added block and tackles and chains and stuff so that they could actually be working. It wasn't just kind of set deck stuff in the background. It was something they could engage with. And this, just hold on this picture for a second. So this pillar that's in the foreground matches the posts that are in the space, but we made it instead so it could roll around and be placed to camera. And there was also a crossbar across the top of it from which we hung that pulley, block and tackle. And so the actor could move it back and forth again to give some look of labor within as they were singing their songs. So this was a fantastic space, and Roy filled it with beautiful light, and there was special effects team, and there was some beautiful natural daylight coming in for some of the scenes. So anyway, it really was a fantastic location to build on, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. Okay, this is the train station, which also figures in the story because we have immigrant and veteran soldiers from World War I coming back to Winnipeg. And also we visit the train station when Mike and Stefan go to try to buy tickets for their family to come from Ukraine. And yes, the trains don't go from the Ukraine to Canada, but we sort of devised it so that you buy a ticket, but it includes the ship passage as well. Anyway, this is the shot of what the train station looks like without us doing anything. So it's gorgeous, and it's just magnificent, and it's fantastic that it has been maintained like this. This is us, and you can see in the lower or sort of in the mid left of the frame there. That's the ticket kiosk that we built. I designed and we built in there, because there is a scene where, again, Mike and Stefan go to the ticket window and try to buy a ticket. And the benches are gorgeous. And fortunately, they were still there. So we just brought them into position, and it was really like it helped to sculpt the space in a wonderful way. And yeah, no, right now, this hasn't been used as a train station for many years. It was the CP train station. And I don't know for how long, but for quite a number of years, it's been used as an Indigenous cultural center. And anyway, it was a fantastic location, and I think Winnipeg's really smart to have maintained it. So again, this is you get a different view of the ticket kiosk and our little luggage area. Moving on in our locations here, the first picture, okay, I'll just give a little prelude here. Originally, we needed a police lockup, and it's told on this picture for a second, Caleb. We needed a police lockup and a factory or some kind of women's sewing room of some kind. And we needed the laborers' printing press, where they print all their pamphlets, brochures, make their banners and the protest signs, etc. And originally, these three sets were all going to be done over in the same building as the tenement set was, because there was more empty floors there, etc. But I think, again, 2 weeks before we were going to have to shoot these sets, it just proved unworkable, because there was just too much sound transfer between the floors. The sound, the sound guy said there's no way he could shoot there. And also the whole delivery truck thing in the alleyway became problematic. So again, less than 2 weeks before we actually had to shoot these sets, the location person, Randy, had to go out and find us another place. And in such a short time, there was really only one other place that was available. And by the time he found it, and we kind of had it locked, it was only 1.5 weeks from when we were shooting the scenes. So I remember really clearly, this is the space where, we said, okay, we have to build the police station here. And I remember very clearly the survey where I was there with my construction manager, my scenic artist, my set designer, my art director, and they were all looking at me like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I had to literally kind of design on my feet. I was able to bring some of the ideas, the broad stroke ideas that I've been planning for the other space, but it was really a very much a site specific solution. Okay, this is what we have. This is what we can do here. So this was the area that we designated. Okay, we'll use this for the police lockup. So if you go to the next picture, I think here's the, yes, okay. So this is what happened is, and you can see the wall on the left is in fact my reconfigured train kiosk. So I reused that. We stretched it out, and where there had been windows, we made solid panels, or vice versa. And the bars along the left, on the right, had all been built. They're just dolls, they aren't metal or anything like that. But it just stay back with that picture for a sec. I'll just finish talking. Yeah. So, anyways, it was it worked out quite well, and there were scenes within the cells themselves. And anyway, so that was like, phew, we got that one done. And while we were doing that, of course, we were also still having to work on the other two sets. So let's go to the next picture. And so this is the other end. Like if you just literally turn 180, this is what you'd be seeing at the other end of where we had decided to build the police station. And you see those nice arch windows. So even though they're kind of maybe too beautiful for where you want to position like a kind of a labor situation, we did use that end, and it became the sewing room where the women were working. And you can go to the next picture for that. Yeah, so there's all the sewing machines that we got from all the thrift stores. And there was a whole other side on the left of that frame. We also had that all dressed as well, but this is just the picture I chose for this. So you can see the similarity between that set I did many, many years ago, 20 years ago. And so it's good to sort of remember, oh yeah, we did that thing back then. So it's not the wheel was invented a really long time ago. So if you draw on your own wheel, I think it's completely legitimate way to solve problems. So we had these two sets happening on the main floor of this building. And then when we'd first gone to survey it, again, we just saw the empty spaces. We thought, what's downstairs? Is there space to do the laborers press there? And so this was the basement of that space. And we thought, yeah, okay, this is kind of has nice character to it. We took the fluorescent lights down, and in that object in the background there, interestingly enough, it's actually a printing press. It's a lithography press, and it was much fancier than our laborers would have had in their space. But they did, within a montage sequence within the film, they do show someone working on it. But it just was kind of interesting that somehow that was already still sitting there waiting for us. And then the next picture just shows you what we did when we dressed it. So I quite love this space because it was just so raw, and the lighting was fantastic. And anyways, it was really, it felt so satisfying to accomplish these three sets in one space. And I have to say, like at one point, again, because our time was so tight, we had the shooting crew was already there, but we had painters, construction people and painters, set decorators, and the shooting crew all working within this one building all at the same time. So it was tricky because you can't work when they're shooting. So anyways, it was challenging, but I think the outcomes were very satisfying. So what time is it now? Whoops, I'm okay. I'm on, okay, that's that section. And I still want to leave some time for questions. So I'll just talk for another maybe 10, 15 minutes, maybe at least 15 minutes for questions. I just want to, collaboration. Okay, I want to pull up just a sampling of what the graphics people do. That's it's a very integral part of the art department. And you might not realize that this is something that our department or production design is about. But Michelle, our graphic designer, had to create all these newspapers because there were scenes where people were reading newspapers. So this is her research. Whoops. What happened? What happened? Sam or Kayla, can you?
I think something must have cut off on his end.
Okay, because I still have a few slides to show, slide images to show. Now, Calix said, is this Calix that went off? Anyways, I'll keep talking and hopefully it'll come back shortly. So besides the collaborations between, the scriptwriter, director, designer that I mentioned before, and locations people and the art department itself, I wanted to just give a little focus on the graphics because that's something that a lot of people I think maybe don't realize is a big job. I'd say about 15, maybe even 20 years ago, graphics became increasingly important for litigious reasons, mostly to cover things that were branding, like Coca-Cola or Pepsi or McDonald's or whatever, things that we didn't get product placement for or didn't have the rights to use. And so a lot of times graphics was simply to devise signage and things like that to cover this stuff. And I'd have to say, to me, that is just like, it's such a shame because it isn't pushing the story forward. It's just covering up stuff that we aren't allowed to use or see. The thing that was really nice about the work on Stand for the graphic designer was almost everything, like literally almost everything, was very much something that pushed the story forward. It was the newspaper, or it was the permission slip that needed to be devised for Mike and Stefan to show to the cops when they came by, or it was when the strike happened, certain businesses were allowed to stay open, and so certain signage was needed in that regard. So Kayla, are you back? You're not back yet. Okay. So anyway, oh, here we are. Okay, so this is an example of Michelle's research for the Winnipeg newspaper she had to do. You can just go through these again more quickly. Let's go to the next picture. Yeah, and then this one, just hold on this for a sec. Let's go back to that picture. So that's what Michelle made. Like she had to actually make the next picture. Yeah. Whoops. that one. Okay, so that's the picture. We got the okay to use Manitoba Free Press. I think it's called Winnipeg Free Press in reality, but we called it Manitoba Free Press. And she created that whole front, and then had it printed on newsprint and put onto a newspaper that was the right size, etc. And so that's something that she designed it, but then she also made it in the art department. Let's go on to the next picture. And this is an example of the signage that was authentic to the time, but also we had made and put in windows of stores and stuff so we could stay open during the strike. And now hold on this for a sec. Okay, no, that next one, the breakdown. Yeah, that one. Hold on that, please. Okay, so now this is Michelle's breakdown. This is just a sample of it, but it just shows you all the work that goes into coming up with what the graphics need to be for a film like Stand. So there's the name of the scene, the number of the scene, which department is eventually going to get it in their hands, whether it's props or costumes or set decoration. And also in the red, orange, green column is what shoot day. And obviously that's really important because that you need to kind of ultimately organize yourself of when things are going to be needed. And then also the cost, the approximate cost. So it's a big thing she has on her plate, she and Michelle in this case, but it's someone else. And they have a huge amount of work to cover. Now, the overall art department breakdown looks somewhat similar to this, but I also rely very much on the graphic designer, the set decorator, and the props person to do their own breakdowns because they drill down to really nth degree. And as a production designer and then with my art director, who in this case was Svetlana Jaklinak, we do an overview so that we kind of understand what everyone needs to accomplish for a certain stage of the story within a certain scene. Next picture, please. And oh, I gotta show that. Okay, so there's a scene where Mike is singing a song and singing it to his wife who's back in Ukraine. And so actually these are my grandparents, my Ukrainian grandparents. And we I don't have the picture of where we did it, but we photoshopped Greg Henry, the man who played Mike Sokolovsky. We photoshopped his face onto my grandfather's face. So these are my Ukrainian Wihak grandparents, and we use this picture in the movie. I think now just organizational. Yeah, on to that. Oh, sorry. These are pictures that Michelle did. They're both her research and the pictures that she sent down to the paint shop to show what banners and posters need to be created for the various strike gatherings. And what's fabulous about the way she's done this is she's showing them in context. It isn't just a square with the words on it and make 10 of them or whatever. Showing them within the context of how they'll be used is invaluable. And I always ask that of my graphic designers, is to show the graphic within the context of how it's going to be used. Okay. There's quite a few of these, so but just get your sense. I want to just appreciate how much work a graphic designer does on a show like this. Okay. Let's go to the next one because I want to leave a free room for questions. Okay, so this is organizational. This is a huge part of my job and everyone's job on a film, but my job and the art director's job. This is my very preliminary location breakdown that I did in April. So you just get a sense of it. Okay, so you list all the the locations, the scene numbers that they occur in, and because this was a musical, I put things in blue if I knew if there was going to be a song sung in that location's first setting. To help flag, oh, there's a song being sung. And again, back in April, we thought there might be dancing too. And then also the page count is really important because if it's only an eighth of a page, it's not unimportant. But if there's locations / sets where there's going to be 5 pages, one has to put more attention on that 5-page thing, and the quarter page or the 8th page will have to fit in to the bigger picture somehow. And that's obviously why we also combine lots of locations in one place as much as possible. But again, just so you understand, this is part of the organization. This is something I do very early on. And as soon as I can get a one-liner or some idea of what the flow of the shooting is going to be, I will do this. But even before that, because this first page is just me in prep. And then the next page shows us shooting. And I have color bands for each person in the art department. Myself, my art director, the graphics person, set decoration, and construction. I don't put props in this because they kind of work more independently during these prep stages, but it just shows the workflow and when it has to happen and the dates it has to happen, etc. And my art director would take this then and make it more granular, assign time frames to things like in and out times and things like that. But this is a broad stroke that I use all the time. And this is my book actually from Donkeyhead. I stick it in the back of my moleskin. I still use a moleskin. I have started using these more on my iPad, but again, it's just something I always refer to all of the time because I just need to keep a track of the overview and when I have to have things designed and when we move from one space to the other, that kind of thing. So anyway, this is my, oh, I've got this too. Oh, okay. So this is the pamphlet we put together on a week by week basis when we're shooting, but this is the one that was from our tech survey. So in this pamphlet are all the floor plans for all the locations that are going to happen in the movie with the expected work that we have to do in each of these locations. So you can just go through these quickly, give a sense of them. So these are floor plans. You know, there's a lot of work that goes into them. Image of the location itself, with notations of what we're doing in each of those places, whether it's construction or set decoration or painting, and so which department it involves. And this is of our alleyway example. And the shoot day, all that kind of information is put on there. And this becomes a guide. Again, this is from the technical survey package, but once the technical survey is over and maybe the schedule gets changed a little bit, we'll reorder those and I'll typically do it 1 week at a time. It's focused on, make sure I'm on top of 5 days of shooting and then we kind of work that way. So anyway, this is the guide we use and I share this with everyone in the art department and it's a useful guide. And again, a lot of people use, you know, we'll send this out as a PDF and there's different paperless apps that are starting to be used, Trello and Slack and things like that. We use paper ones and we'll see where it lands next time I do a book show, whether I'll be paperless or whether I'll still go back to paper. Okay, so that's pretty much it for Stand. And again, it was just a fantastic project to work on. And I hope this was informative and gave you a little view in. I'll just wait on Donkeyhead for a sec. I'll talk about Donkeyhead for like 3 minutes, so at least we have 15 minutes for questions and answers. So this is Donkeyhead. It's a real quick thing because I read the script. Let's just go to the first one, which was inspirational and Mona. Yeah, so this is Mona. No, this is inspirational. Which one is this? Anyway, I got brought onto this project through Agam Darshi, who is a friend of a film colleague of mine, again, through those kind of connections. And she had been working with the DOP, Leo Harum, for months and months before I got involved. She and I first spoke, I think, in mid-November. So I tried to jump into their ongoing conversation with some imagistic ideas to see if it was tapping into what they'd been talking about. And fortunately it was. So these are, again, these imagistic ideas that some, you know, reminiscent of the kind I use for Stand, but again, maybe I'm walking around in a blur and I just like that blurry world. But the idea of, you know, portraiture that was slightly obscured also ties into the fact that the main character in Donkeyhead is Mona, played by Agam Darshi. And she's a character that is somewhat in a state of flux and confusion. And so again, this kind of visual metaphoric approach suited that, we felt. Maybe just jump to the palette, or no, pictures of Mona. There's one picture of Mona, I believe. So I was trying to, this one here, I was trying to determine, okay, who is Mona? Just go back, you can just go back to the collage, that'll be fine, thanks. And Agam Darshi played Mona, the main character, and she was written really well and clearly. It's a fabulous script written by Agam. But again, just trying to determine, well, who is she? What's her style like? Is she tough? Is she sad? Like who is she? So I drew on Cindy Sherman book I have. And again, I didn't specify, but I look at photography books a lot. I have a big library, you can see it behind me. But a lot of my research is and impressions are drawn from photography books. So these are images from both Cindy Sherman and Nan Golden. And again, I just threw them out more as a point of discussion with Agam to say, do any of these resonate? Do any of these feel like Mona to you? And quite a few of them did. So that was good. And it just helped us kind of help define who Mona was. Okay, next go into the palette. Yeah, so the palette was something that Agam came to our initial conversation with something she already had in mind. And that was that she wanted to use a lot of navy and orange as kind of as a motif through the film. The story focuses on Mona, who is Punjabi Sikh, and the life she has with her father, who's ailing, and her siblings that come to be part of the scenario in support of the father whose health is failing. So the navy and the navy blue and orange palette was something that she felt was integral. If you could just go back to that previous one, please, Kalik. So the picture on the lower right of the Sikh priests around an altar, she used as the example she gave to me is like, even though that's mostly blue, the priests are partially in orange, and there's sort of a pale orange blush color on the walls with the daylight coming in. So that was an image that she definitely held up as like a leitmotif for the movie. And all these other pictures are ones that I shared with her to say, okay, is this where we're going? Like some of them are from the natural world, and some of them will be through decor, and some of them will be through details. And again, this was just, again, one of the things that kept the conversation going of where the palette would land. And then the next picture is Agam had originally written the story to take place in Calgary and be shot partially in Regina. But for various reasons, it was decided to both shoot it and set the story in Regina. And so I shared a lot of pictures of most of these pictures are mine. Some of them I took from off online, but most of them are pictures I've taken while I've been in Regina over my various visits here. And so the orange and the blue come naturally, to Regina with the blue of the sky and the amber orange of the sunsets and dusks. And I think this helped convince Leo and Agam that shooting in Regina would be a good thing. They were quite taken by these images. And during these conversations, Agam also brought up the idea that she wanted to embrace Regina for all its jolie lad qualities. Now, this is a term she used, not me, I'm just repeating it. And I think I'm not offended, and I hope nobody from Regina is offended, but it means the, beautiful, ugly face of Regina. So, she, in the course of the movie, she showed lots of dirty snowbanks and and what crusty snowbanks, dirty snowbanks, but she also showed some very beautiful things of Regina. So that jolie laid approach was a bit of our kind of concept for the film. And it prevailed even to the interior of the house, which I'll talk about just briefly when we talk about this next group of images, which is the Punjabi Sikh research, which I had to do because I've never designed for a Punjabi Sikh world. And so Agam shared some images with me, and I also did my own research. But one thing is it's like she would say herself, it's kind of overly fancy, sometimes kind of tacky. And so in a way, it was kind of the jolie led as well. So some of it was very beautiful, and some of it was outright junky and cluttered. So these are just some of the research images I did for that. And you see the larger picture that has the wallpaper. Agam definitely wanted a lot of wallpaper in the environment. 3/4 of the story take place within the Sikh Punjabi home of Mona and her dad. And so that was a place where we invested a lot of our energy. So let's go on to the next things, which are locations into worlds. And I know the clock is ticking, there's almost not time for questions. So let's just quickly go through these. So this is the house we used on Victoria. The story had been written to be a suburban house. And through the course of our discussions and stuff, I asked Agam if she'd like to look at maybe some older houses, and she liked that. So ultimately, in a longer period of time, I could describe it more, but we ended up with an older house, and this is, we slight changes on it to make it look a little less pretty. It was an empty house, which is what we wanted. This is the wallpaper I chose to do in the house. I looked at tons and tons and tons of wallpaper, but these are the samples of the ones we used in the house. This is the front porch before we dressed it and wallpapered it. And I think the next picture is it once it's dressed. Yeah, so you can just sort of see, let's go through these pictures and you get a sense of how we changed this empty house. That was the front room. And this is the living room, dining room and living room. And then this is what it looked like once we wallpapered it and dressed it. And this is, again, this is a scene from the movie. And at one point in the movie, the living room gets turned into a Sikh prayer room. So the priests are having prayers for the father who's ill upstairs. This is the room once it's turned into that. So it had to go back and forth between those two quite often. And this is the dining room looking back towards the kitchen, and a closer shot of that. And the next picture is just from the movie itself. So you can see that we added wallpaper and dressing and all that. Next picture, I believe, is okay. The family moves out at the end. So this is just the empty house with the wallpaper left behind. This is the kitchen, obviously, before we did anything to it. And the reverse on that. And we had to add a pantry back where Leo, that's the DOP Leo. We had to add a pantry back there because of the scene in the kitchen that involved a pantry. And so this is the kitchen once we wallpapered and dressed it. And there's the reverse where the pantry got built. So that wall with the door in it in the background there is the pantry. And this is, oh, hold on this for a sec. Okay, so this is up on the second floor. And this was a kitchen because the house was divided into 2 apartments. And this is the second floor. But we didn't want to see a kitchen up there because it was supposed to be a family house that they'd all lived in since they were, since the 1980s. So I decided to turn this into kind of a landing hallway because there were a lot of scenes that happened up in the second floor landing hallway. And so this next picture is what it looked like after we built the walls and put a window in. There was we only see this in one scene in the movie, but it's a scene that's completely held at from that camera angle, and all the characters come back and forth and there's conversations and stuff. Meanwhile, the aunt is sitting in the back table eating cookies. This is the 3rd floor where Mona's bedroom was, and it was pretty nice, but we tried to dress it down a bit and make it turn into a place where she just hung out. And it's the next picture. Yeah, so that's Mona's room once it's dressed. So anyway, it was challenging to do Donkeyhead post-Christmas because things were shut down. And by the way, of course, there was a pandemic, so people were hesitant to let us into their homes and their lives. But somehow we managed, and I had a very small crew. But this is another location, a law office that we got handed a week before we shot it, completely empty and full of junk. But Kat Donnelly was one of ours. She's an on-set dresser, and she came in the week before and turned it into this lovely office. So this is the place before, and this is it once it got dressed. Made some signs. That's the cast family, and then this is Kat in the empty office. There was a few sticks of furniture kicking around this empty office complex, and then this is it once it got dressed. So. Anyway, that's Donkeyhead, and we have like only 7 minutes left for questions and answers, but I hope there's a few, and hope this was useful and informative for you guys, and that and feel free to email me if you have any questions that can't be answered during the course of this session. I don't know if there's a little extra time we can have. I know the next screening's in half an hour or just over half an hour, but I'm available, so take it away, questions.
All right, thank you very much, Marian. Yeah, we're now going to open to questions. So the question button should just be on the bottom of your screens. And yeah.
If there are any questions.
Okay, this first one is from Jillian Bader. Love the talk. It was great to see behind the scenes of some beautiful sets. What is your favorite part about production design? Do you have a specific style or year you like working with the best? Thanks.
Hey, Jillian, thanks for your question. I don't have a favorite year. To me, it's always, if the script is good, I don't care what year it is. If the script's engaging, it could be contemporary. story, it could be period. And of course, period's fun because the research and turning, the world that we're living in into something that we aren't living in anymore. That's interesting. But there's always some world that exists in a good script that makes it worth designing. So I don't have one particular phase of design that I like the most. It's a very organic, immersive process. I do like conceptualizing things. That is, I like having those conversations of what could this be, and talking about the potential and possibilities. But it's also really satisfying to see things come together and walk into a space once you've finished it and go, yeah, this is the world we've created. So I don't have one particular favorite stage of anything or favorite year, but I hope that answered your question, and thanks for asking it.
Okay, the next question is from someone anonymous. Great talk, so much detail. The art department has so many visual areas that need to be dealt with. In budgeting, how do you begin to work out where to allocate resources? Is there usually much back and forth with the producers on the budget available?
Thanks for your question. Budget is a back and forth situation for sure. In the best scenario, the producers give you the budget, what they hope you to be able to do with the budget. And then you can't really sort of say, okay, that's what the budget is until you know whether you're dealing with locations or whether you're building sets or whether you're taking a location and painting it or building it. So you can use the budget you're provided as kind of the framework, and okay, that's kind of where they want you to land. And usually think, they have a little more than that, is what the general belief is. But I like to sort of try to approach it like, okay, this is only how much they have, which is, I like working on Canadian independent films, so it's usually this is only how much they have. And you do go back and forth, but not necessarily you don't go right into the producer saying, how about this, how about that? Like I'll go back and forth in terms of my own assessment of things. And as like, let's say use Donkeyhead, the most recent example, is once we knew what house we were using, because I didn't know what house we were using until really late in the game, so I couldn't really budget what we had to do. And what we had to do was wallpaper it all, which I had started budgeting that beforehand because I knew that Agam wanted a lot of wallpaper. So I thought, okay, we're gonna have to get a lot of wallpaper, and like let's say a room is 10 by 10 or 10 by 12. I can kind of guess maybe there's 4 rooms, so I can kind of do a broad strokes on that. But I didn't know I had to hide a kitchen, and I didn't know I had to build a pantry, those kinds of things. So it's really hard until you get some of those key bits of information in hand to know how to budget properly or divide it up properly. I get a chunk of money, and it might be given to me on paper as like, oh, this is how much for set deck, this is for props, this is for graphics, that kind of thing. And I just take the bottom amount and then I move it around a bit as needed. If a project is slated to be completely built from scratch, it's a slightly different thing. Like when I did Goodrich, for example, there was tons of studio sets that I designed and we built for that. So that, in a way, is a slightly more straightforward process. And that I'll do preliminary sketches of what the plan should be like for these environments. And then I'll talk with the construction manager and say, okay, how much do you think this would cost? I would provide sketches if I have them, picture reference if I have them, floor plan, again, scaled floor plans with approximate details of what's going to go on in there, to a construction manager and who would oversee paint as well at that stage of the game. And they would give me a dollar figure estimate for what that might cost. So there's different ways you can go about budgeting, and it varies depending on the project, but it is definitely a back and forth thing, even within my own planning and organization. Does that answer your question?
All right, this next question is from another anonymous person. Hello, thank you for the great workshop. What is an entry-level position for production design, or how do you recommend getting started after film school?
If you're interested in getting into art department, production design, I've been doing this for like over 30 years, so you work your way up. But if as a student, you could certainly help on other colleagues' films to just start getting handy with kind of creating environments. But if you're talking about trying to make a living and get into the union stream of things, I'm in the Directors Guild of Canada, which is a labor organization, and it has jurisdiction in Saskatchewan, and Ontario, and Alberta, and in the Atlantic provinces. But for example, IATSE covers our department in BC and Manitoba. So in both of those situations, regardless of which jurisdiction you're under, an entry level into the art department it depends a little bit the terminology, but essentially it's like a trainee, or sometimes they call it an RPA. But most organizations, the Directors Guild included, has an entry level position, and you can apply for it. And they have intakes usually a couple times a year. I know in the Directors Guild, for example, in Ontario, there's an intake. I think it's in May, and you would be asked to probably submit images of work you've done. They could be photographs, they could be drawings, they could be just a letter expressing your interest. If you're a filmmaker, they could be a short film, whatever. It's more just to decide. It's assessed whether you have the potential to be someone who would enjoy and be good in the art department. And then there's various training within the Directors Guild anyway. There's training courses one can take when you're in kind of this, what they call gap trainee position. In Saskatchewan, the Directors Guild has jurisdiction for our department, but it's not very, like, there really is very much work going on there, as you know, sadly. But there's also a situation you can almost get a job in anything and get permitted. You might have to pay the permit, or they might have to pay it for you. So there's various routes into it. But again, if you want to email me, get my email through Sam or the Living Skies Film Festival, and I'm happy to give you a little more directed, specific personal information on that. So feel free.
Okay, Flora Froze says, "Hello, I love the workshop. Thank you for your time. I would love to know the name of the tool you use to quick register colors on set, if you were able to say it. Thank you."
My Nix, here it is. I didn't hear the first name, Frozen. I don't know if you can see that. You see it? It's Nix, and Nix. You see it? Nix. Oh, it's kind of hard to see. Nix, and I think this is about $100. And again, what you have to set it up on your phone and stuff for which catalog of paint colors you want to draw upon. But anyway, it's very handy. It isn't, I have to say, it's not 100% accurate, but when I wasn't going to be able to like paint everything from scratch anyway, it was a quick, easy guide, and it saved me having to like, okay, what color is that this color gray, or is it that color gray, and then cutting out chips and stuff like that. So anyway, it's a handy tool, and I'd use it. I'd recommend it.
Okay, another one from an anonymous. What's been one of the more stressful spaces you've had to work with?
I don't quite understand. What do you mean spaces? You mean environments? Like, is that sorry, is that the question?
It says what's been one of the more stressful spaces you've had to work with?
Yes, I'm just trying to determine when you mean stressful spaces, do you mean stressful like physical environments that I've had to go into and change into something? Is that, or do you mean headspaces, like stressful headspaces? If you just get some clarity on that.
Yeah, if you could just get some clarity on that, I'll just move on to the next question.
Okay.
This one is from another anonymous. Thank you for this, Marian. Your work is so beautifully detailed. Can you name any films or theatrical productions you found particularly inspiring?
Boy, there's lots. I mean, what I could do is talk about the very first film I ever saw, where first film and the first theater thing, because in a way that's where I've seen many beautiful film and theater productions in my life, but I'll just reference the first two that made me realize, this is something that people are creating, and it still stays with me. The first one was a Quebec film called Jean Martin Photographe, and I think it must be like, I saw it when I was in university, so it's got to be like 40 years old. But it was a Quebec film, and just, some of the framing, it was mostly set in pastoral Quebec, about a photographer that went around and took pictures, like around 1900, took pictures of people in small towns and stuff. And it was really about the relationship he had with his wife, who decided one summer to travel with him. Anyway, it was so framed and photographed so beautifully. And I just remember thinking, wow, I'd love to have been able to like contribute to that, because it was just so stunning. So that is what, and when I've seen other films, it's usually like, if I look at it and go, wow, I'd like to be in that world, or I'd like to contribute to that world. I wish I'd been able to contribute to that world. That, rather than a name of, other than the genre 10 photograph, that is kind of my barometer of how much I love a film. And in theater productions, when I was in grade 12, I saw a production called Pippin on Broadway. And our class went as a school trip. And it was directed and choreographed by Bob Fosse, who I hope you've heard of before, he's a brilliant guy. And I didn't know who he was at the time. I'd been reading up in Time magazine before I went to New York about what Broadway shows would be worth seeing. And this was kind of on the list. And I was studying jazz dancing at the time. So I thought, okay, this has got song and dance, I'll go to that. And I literally was in the back row of the theater in New York City, like way high up, like in the gods, as they say. Like literally, I couldn't have been farther away from the stage, but it was just magical. And it started off a black stage, and Ben Breen came out. He's a singer dancer. He came out and he reached to the floor and he pulled out this basically what turned into a stage full of colorful pennants, and it just transformed the space. And this was before I decided to study theater design or anything like that. But I just remember that this stage production was not just full of amazing dancing, but just amazing visuals. And I thought, wow, who did that? Like, and I actually didn't find out who did that kind of stuff until the next year when I went to university. But I'll just say that those two things sparked my interest in doing this, and surprises like that continue to make me want to do it. So.
Okay, going back to clarity on that last question,
Yeah.
what's been from the anonymous, what's been one of the more stressful work in like set environments that you've had to rework for film?
It's a hard question. Good question, but a hard one. I'm trying to think. Well, I mean, even just going back to Stand, I mean, it was stressful. Like, I have to say, standing in that spot and having this whole team look at me, and I had to come up with something that was stressful. Though ultimately it was quickly resolved, because again, this stage in my career, or even 2 years ago, like I could deal with it. I think actually, when I think of stressful spaces, I know you're asking for what the environment is, what the most stressful kind of space I had to transform is. And there's always a way, like I think that I do believe that there's always a way to make something out of nothing. And so I think the more stressful thing is when the collaboration is sour, or there's a person who is a sour part of the mix. And realistically, that, when I think back, I don't have any bad memories of creating spaces. It's not that come to mind. The things that come to mind, if I'm asked to look at that, what's stressful is when someone's a real hell or nasty or horrible to either myself or to other people. So in fact, I just have to, that's the answer I'll give you, is there's always a way to kind of make a space or an environment work, but people are harder to change.
All right, April Casper asks, will you quickly discuss the logistical differences between dressing on location versus on a built set? What's easier, cheaper, better, faster, etc.? Thank you for this lovely talk.
Hey, April. I don't think there's, again, it depends on what the situation is. Like dressing on location, if your location happens to be outside and it's 40 below, or it's pouring rain or something like that, that makes it pretty difficult. And in fact, right in front of me on my bulletin board, just past my computer, I have a picture of a bunch of us sitting on a set for Pit Pony, a film I did out in Nova Scotia and Cape Breton many years ago. and we're all in raincoats. That was bloody hard because it was pouring rain and it was windy, and we were trying to like dress this mindset. So that's hard. That's really hard. Dressing a set inside a studio is almost never as hard because it's inside, so you aren't dealing with the elements. And ideally, if you're decorating sets in a studio set, the pace is such that, not always the case, but the pace is such that, okay, the set's been built, it's been painted, we get some time, the set deck department gets some time to go in and do their stuff. And lighting has either been in, probably the lighting has ideally been in before they even put the set up and they put the grid up in place. And then they build the set and then they paint the set. And then lighting might come in to actually hang lights and focus them. And then dressing comes in. In a bad situation, there's a clusterfuck and all of this happens all at the same time. And that can always still be the case, whether you're in a studio or whether you're on location. But the weather quotient can obviously make dressing outside difficult. And if it's a location that is empty, then in terms of the amount of work, you're almost as if you're in a studio starting from scratch. So, and also when you're creating these worlds, which I'll bring up that word again, is quite often you do need to add a lot of dressing. It's rare you just walk into a space and it's perfect. So going back to when I mentioned if a scene, if there's 1/8 of a page in a script and it's the only time you're there, give me a location that's fully dressed, please. Unless it's like such a special part of the script that, it's a special dream or a special moment. But going back to Donkeyhead, I had really, really hoped that law office would be a dressed set because we had no time to really dress it because we were focusing on the house. But because we found a location that was available to us and it was empty, the production allowed me to hire Kat Donnelly to come in specifically just to focus on that set. So that relieved a lot of pressure for us. So there's not any one answer for what you're asking, but there's always variables. But again, weather is a quotient that always makes things a little trickier, put it that way.
All right, another anonymous who asks, when planning a film, where do you source your items from? Is it mostly secondhand or more personally made for the film?
That's actually, it depends on the production. So again, looking at Donkeyhead, partially because of the milieu that was happening in this Sikh Punjabi household that within our backstory had been established as the family home probably in the early to mid 80s. David Beckler, who's my art director / set decorator on the project, had just finished a project where he bought everything exclusively on Facebook Marketplace. So that's what we did. And it was fantastic. Like we just got so much great stuff from the Regina and Saskatoon and environs Facebook Marketplace. And then at the end of the movie, we sold it that way as well. So that was a really great source. I mean, especially in COVID times, yes, we could go around Value Village and places like that have been open, but the Facebook Marketplace was less expensive. And, you kind of let your fingers do the walking. You sit at home and kind of look at these things online. And it was a fantastic approach. Certainly, I've done lots and lots of looking at secondhand stores and I've not done a lot of projects where I've had custom made furniture done. Certainly on some of the bigger Hollywood films that I worked on as an assistant, we'd have custom made furniture done, or even on Good Witch, we had some, custom upholstery done and things like that. But it's usually a mix of both. I don't do sci-fi, or I haven't done sci-fi, so I know that I have friends working on the various Star Treks and Expanse and things like that. And of course, those things are custom built and in great detail and for a lot of money. So it does depend on the project. And personally, I found that the kind of projects I work on, there's usually a blend of finding things that are in the real world, or finding that already have their own history, or finding more contemporary things, even from IKEA or whatever, and modifying them somehow by painting them or upholstering them or something like that. So it's a mix. It can be a mixture.
Okay, Zach Belinsky says, awesome talk. Is there a different process or structure when designing for TV shows? As I feel like the sets would be ever changing and the time constraints for the episodes to come out.
Hey, Zach, yeah, that's an insightful question. Personally, I actually don't like doing series all that much. I have done them, but the schedule definitely drives the boat in a typical series. And so in the art department, I mean, I sort of use this analogy. Like, I often felt like I was just flinging things over my shoulder and hoping they landed in the right position because we're just so busy getting the next thing ready. And I think this has changed a bit with the streaming platforms because, the limited series, the 4 and 6 part series, there's, they're often shot like a movie as opposed to an episodic TV show, procedural where every week is slightly different. But yeah, no, the pace can be different in TV than film, though certainly again on the Canadian independent kind of films that I've been working on, we don't have a luxurious shooting schedule, so you have to really kind of keep on top of things, which is again going back to that calendar, that workflow I showed you is really important to me. Though every art department has a workflow schedule. I'm definitely not the only one. We definitely all work based on workflows, and yeah, I mean, the thing about series also is because they can go on for months and months. Keeping up that momentum could be exhausting, and that's another reason I actually haven't elected to do them much in my career. I won't say that I won't ever do them, but I'd like partially because I have my own visual art practice. I'll work on a feature or art performance project or something for a few months, and then taking a break is not such a bad thing because it helps me kind of focus on some of my own work as well. So yes, there's definitely a different pace. You're right on that, and I think in terms of some people love the series and having that regular rhythm because the rhythm does end up setting into place of sorts, whereas on a feature the rhythm might be harder to establish in the duration of a few months that you're working on it. So I hope that answered your question.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question here. So another anonymous person says, your job requires so much juggling of tasks, and I imagine you have many demands on your attention. Can you talk a little bit about the usefulness of delegation and time management?
Sure, really important. It's really important to delegate and have good time management. And again, I think, I mean, I started off in theater, but then at a very young age, in my early 20s, I got a job at CBC as an assistant designer. And even though back then there was a certain luxury of time in terms of preparation, I think that's where I learned about time management. It was my job to kind of partially keep the designer on track for things. And I think it's just, one of those skills that I've developed over the years. So I'm pretty good at time management. But that said, I think most people who work in film are good at time management, or they have to be, because it is a very timely thing. Things are needed. It isn't like home construction where you can say, yeah, next week, and then it's really 2 months later or something like that. It's like, no, it's like the cameras are going to roll. You have to be ready for it. So it's like, being chased by that timeline is something that I don't mind doing. And again, going back to my schedule and calendar, but again, delegating absolutely important. And typically I would have like an art director and a couple assistants and on a typical show, just a modest size show, and a set decorator, and they would have some people, and so collaborating and having those conversations is part of the delegation process. It's like, yes, I will be very hands-on and have very clear maybe opinions and ideas about what I want the set decoration to be, but I can't be out doing it all. I mean, on Donkeyhead, I was one of the people that was out doing it all, but typically there's a team of people that are out doing that for me, and then they bring pictures and we have presentations and we talk about, oh, this will work and that won't work. So yes, it's not just delegation. It's just part of the collaborative process that involves, yes, delegation, but it's also imparting, the creative agency to more people. So is that the last question?
Yeah, that's all the time we have for questions, I believe.
Okay, well, thanks.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, everyone, and
thanks for the questions. It was great to have all that curiosity. And again, reiterate that I guess my email can be made available through Living Skies, and I'm happy to answer any questions, follow-up questions anyone has.
All right, thank you so much, Marian, for giving such an excellent workshop. And
Okay, thank you for inviting me.
yeah, no problem. I'm now gonna direct everyone to our last night of streaming films, and then 5 to 10 minutes after that, there will be the award show.
Right. Have a great rest of the festival, guys. Bye.